Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Hayya al-salah. Hayya al-salah. Hayya al-falah. Hayya al-falah. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. لا إله إلا الله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على النبي الأمين. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى صحبه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم يا علي عظيم، يا رب العالمين، ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا، وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. رب اغفر لي ولوالدي ولمن دخل بيتي مؤمنا، وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات، ولا تزد الظالمين إلا تبارا يا رب العالمين. SubhanAllah, in so many parts of the Quran, to the point that one wrestles with what choice, what selection, what part to focus on. All of them cumulatively conveying the same basic message. The same basic message of sacrifice as the essential fuel for transformation and change. Whatever human beings dream of, whatever human beings aspire to, whatever fantasies visit their minds, whatever hopes and aspirations they dream up, Allah's sunnah, Allah's very law of nature and creation is that no change, no emancipation, no liberation is possible without the sacrifice. So when, for instance, when Allah reminds us in Surah Al-Anfal, and as I said, as in many other parts, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَهَاجَرُوا وَجَاهَدُوا بِأَمْوَالِهِمْ وَأَنفُسِهِمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ والذين آووا ونصروا أولئك بعضهم أولياء بعض. Those, Allah points a finger at those who are the active agent in society, the actual fuel for change, the actual power for transformation. What is their state? What is the condition of these people? Are these people pious? Well, yes. But what Allah focuses on is the proof of this piety, the actual material proof of the piety. Because Allah knows that human beings are capable of making all types of assertions, all types of claims, all types of arguments about their convictions and belief. But it is all for naught if it is not backed up by a systematic ideology of sacrifice. So Allah tells us about those who sacrifice, those who hajaru, migrated, who displaced themselves, gave up all their familiar connections, all their familiar communal ties, gave up the stability of their business, the stability of their careers, the stability of their worldly aspirations, and displaced themselves and migrated, chasing after a dream for transformation and change, a dream for a society unlike the society that they left behind. The society that they existed in, the society in Mecca, was a society marked and well known for its hierarchies, for its power structures of subjugation and domination. Those who were in top had been in top for centuries. The prominent, powerful families of Mecca. And those who were at the bottom also had been at the bottom for centuries. The nobodies of Mecca. Those who belonged to a kinship, a bloodline that is not a part of the elite. A bloodline that had, long before Islam came along, had been excluded from the club of the elites. In pursuit of this dream of transformation, and we have to, consistently, all the time, remember what this Hijra was about. The Hijra was not to go to a different location to just end up reproducing the inequities and injustices that Muslims witnessed and lived with in Mecca. The Hijra meant an opportunity to construct a more equitable society, a society of justice, a society in which the weak is not subjugated and victimized without recourse Rest assured that if this had not been the aspiration, if those who migrated from Mecca to Medina did not hope to create a more equitable, a more fair, a more just, a more moral, a more ethical society, the Islamic project would have failed from the very beginning. People are not willing to give up everything that has become familiar to them, that represented at least the security of predictability, of knowing what will come tomorrow, simply to end up in the exact same position you left. So the sacrifice of Hijra, but beyond that, those who understand that Islam represents a jihad, a consistent struggle, بأموالهم وأنفسهم. They committed themselves to the struggle. And it's really interesting that Allah puts money even before the self. بأموالهم وأنفسهم. That they committed to the jihad, to the struggle, with their money and with themselves. This revolutionary moment was a call, absolutely for certain, a call of emancipation for the individual. The individual emancipated herself or himself before even the possibility of physical emancipation was the emancipation of consciousness. You no longer accepted your old masters as your masters. You no longer thought of the Meccan aristocracy as those who have a recognized right to control your destiny. The emancipation is, as an individual, an emancipation of self-determination. I choose to worship God. And in choosing to worship God, I worship no other than God. So I don't submit in subservience to any other but God. It is an emancipation of the inside, the very soul of the individual. But that's not where it stops. The command beyond the emancipation of the individual is for those who are emancipated, for those who have liberated themselves from the mirage, the fictitious reality that dictates and necessitates subordination and necessitates submission to power structures that are unjust and unethical, is that then for the emancipated human being, to look beyond himself and herself and to come together in a community. And through the power of this community, the emancipatory Islamic project is pushed further and served. And so Allah tells us, وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. If you don't recognize yourself as a community, allied by a common emancipatory project, by a common recognition of what it means to be liberated in God, in order to do so, your system of allegiances and alliances, who you pulsate with, who you respond to at the most core level of your being, has to change. If you continue to look towards the forces of subordination, those who have subordinated you, those who have enslaved you, the power structures of inequity and injustice, if you do not recognize that you have divorced yourself from these power structures, in other words, if you somehow continue to believe that you are either in a marriage to these forces or some other amicable relationship, what does the Quran tell us would happen? Well, time and again, as Allah points out in Surah Al-Anfal, when Allah says, إِلَّا تَفْعَلُوهُ إِلَّا تَفْعَلُوهُ تَكُنْ فِتْنَةٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَسَادٌ كَبِيرٌ. إِلَّا تَفْعَلُوهُ تَكُنْ فِتْنَةٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَسَادٌ كَبِيرٌ. If you don't do it, if you don't commit, the outcome will be that corruption, and notice what the Quran says, corruption will overtake the earth. Fitnatun fil ard. Fitna is the word that we use for a state of temptation or a state of confusion. By its very essence, fitna connotes the production of chaos, the production of confusion. At this very early stage, Surah Al-Anfal is revealed early on, right after the Hijra. And Allah is warning us that if the emancipatory project does not earn sacrifice from those individuals who proclaim themselves emancipated, if they do not, in fact, serve the cause with deliberate and determined sacrifices, and if they don't make the transformation from an individualistic mindset of I care only about myself and my fate and what will happen to me in the hereafter, if they do not make that transformation to a communal commitment of saying we serve a cause, and all those who serve a cause belong to a philosophy of life, a system of norms, or a normative system of commitments, and communally, collectively, we have a mission of emancipation and liberation, of standing up against the very same type of societies that we migrated from, that we escaped from, societies of deep injustice and inequity, and subordination. If you don't make that communal commitment, and of course the comment that there will be a fitna and a great corruption on earth is forward looking, because it doesn't make sense if we limit it to the small group of people that migrated from Mecca to Medina, but rather it is a timeless message to Muslims. This is not just talk about believing in a God. This is a philosophy of life, a commitment to individual emancipation and to collective action as emancipated people, serving a common cause. And if you lose sight of that, there will be great corruption on earth, and there will be a fitna. And what is the fitna? Well, quite simply, if you know anything about the Quran, the fitna is the confusion of hypocrisy. The fitna is the confusion of being unable to tell the difference between right and wrong. In fact, the fitna could very well be, and it is very likely that it is, that you no longer understand that belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an emancipatory project, that it is a project of liberation, a project of throwing off the chains of subordination as to other human beings, that you lose sight of the relationship between a Muslim and morality and ethics and justice, and you simply become a non-entity, someone who has turned belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the one and only God, into a meaningless creed, a creed that espouses selfishness and individuality and self-centeredness and nothing beyond. Look, Muslim countries, Arab countries met together in Saudi Arabia. And because we Muslims were born in fasad, we were born in a corrupted earth, we were born in the heart of the fitna, in the heart of the confusion as to what is right and wrong. Because we were born in it, all of us anticipated practically nothing from the Muslim summit. Well over 1 billion Muslims in the world. All these Muslim countries come together and they cannot change one bit of the reality. They all witness a genocide of their fellow Muslims. Indeed, even before this genocide, for years and decades, they witness the lands and homes of their fellow Muslims being stolen and annexed. They witness a full-fledged apartheid regime. They witness a consistent and persistent policy of violating the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque. They witness it all. And they are as ineffective and as useless as when the genocide is unfolding in Gaza. They are so powerless that one can hardly take the summit of all Muslim powers with any degree of seriousness whatsoever. Not even Israel takes them with any degree of seriousness whatsoever. They come together. The states that have relations with Israel don't even dare cut off ties, don't even dare canceling their agreements with Israel. Their support of the Palestinian people is limited to Israel, please, please, please let us send our convoys through the Rafah gate. Please let the convoys through so we can give humanitarian aid. And that is pretty much it. Even the country, Egypt, that is in every bit a full-fledged participant in the siege on Gaza. Egypt, that receives its marching orders from Israel. Israel tells Egypt to close the Rafah gate, and Egypt has no choice but to say, yes, sir. Even the president of Egypt, in one of the most farcical moments of this conference, gets up there and talks about how horrible the blockade of Gaza is, completely ignoring the fact that Egypt, but for Egypt, there would be no blockade of Gaza. That Egypt doesn't dare say no, And it's not just doesn't dare say no about the Gaza passage, but since Camp David, Israel has the power to quite frequently dictate which intellectuals have the freedom to think and write and appear on TV and publish in newspapers in Egypt, and who does not. So Egypt protested when, for instance, Mustafa Mahmoud was publishing a series of articles about the state of Israel. Israel effectively commanded the Egyptian government to ban Mustafa Mahmoud from appearing on TV or publishing anywhere, and Egypt complied, and the man was censored for 14 years. Then he passed away. But this is just not one incident. There are a whole slew of intellectuals, professors, and writers that the Egyptian government silenced because Israel protested their thought. A more thorough and complete picture of subservience and servitude is not possible. Is not possible. So, when the entire Muslim world gets together and all it could come up with is we condemn what is going on, we urge the slaughter to stop, we urge that the genocide come to an end, but we don't dare do anything. We are not going to demand that the US stops using their military bases in our countries to supply Israel. Not a single Muslim country dared tell the US, you cannot send weapons, tools of death and destruction from the bases in our lands. Not one. Not one Muslim country dared tell the US, you can't use our airspace to continue on with this genocide. One of the most telling moments of our historical existence, a country like Saudi Arabia, the so-called guardian of the holy sites, when Saudi Arabia was caught red-handed over the Khashoggi affair, the Saudi Arabia was willing to pay billions of dollars just to save the neck of Mohammed bin Salman, to persuade Turkey, France, Britain, the US to let MBS off the hook, to basically stall the matter so that Khashoggi, the assassination of Khashoggi, doesn't end up before the International Criminal Court, doesn't end up being the incident that causes the downfall of Mohammed bin Salman. Literally, Saudi Arabia bribed the free world with billions and billions of dollars. But it didn't stop there. When it looked like the billions of dollars paid in bribery might not work, Saudi Arabia showed semi-independence, a little bit of independence, and showed that it could have fangs. So Saudi Arabia started rapprochement towards China, started sending signals to the West. If you don't drop this Khashoggi matter, we could change our entire policy and politics by drawing closer to China, by buying weapons from China instead of the US. And everyone at the time, if you recall, talked about how powerless the Biden administration looked and appeared to be. And people were actually making fun of the Biden administration because the Saudis were pushing them around. Not an iota of this resolve was demonstrated over Gaza. The Saudis are fully aware of the daily images of absolute brutality and genocide taking place in Gaza. And all the innovation and creativeness that we saw over the Khashoggi affair to save MBS's behind was not at display over Gaza. In fact, the Saudis would not even say that what Israel is doing in Gaza makes us put aside indefinitely the idea of normalizing relations with Israel. What Saudi Arabia actually said is once this is over, i.e., once Israel kills whatever number of Palestinians it wishes to kill, absolutely, we will resume normalization talks. The plight of the world that we live in Islam has lost its meaning and its power for all these so-called Muslim countries. If you need any proof, as if you need any proof, demonstrations in support of Palestinians in non-Muslim countries far exceed in volume and power the demonstrations in support of Palestinians in Muslim countries. And this is not because Muslims don't care, but Muslims are not free. They live in servitude. We all heard, I am sure, and all sat here watching in amazement, not only as Saudi Arabia banned all its imams from even doing dua for Gaza, but actually arrested visitors to Mecca, arrested a Turkish fellow and arrested another Algerian fellow and several Egyptians who were overheard doing dua for Gaza at the Haram. So they prayed Jama'ah with people. These are common people. And after the Salah, they raised their hand and did dua for Gaza. They were arrested. This totalitarian state in which you cannot tweet even an implicit criticism against the ruling class without being found out, pursued, and jailed. All speech in Saudi Arabia is monitored and carefully controlled. And this is precisely why when we see well-known Saudi intellectuals, including a very well-known personal advisor to the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, consistently write or tweet about how Hamas is a terrorist state, about how Israel has a right to defend itself, about how the war is entirely futile, about how it is the Palestinians who are genociding themselves, about how it is the Palestinians who truly asked for it. In other words, adopting a thoroughly right-wing Israeli discourse. We all know that in Saudi Arabia, it is impossible to make such statements or publish such articles or say such things on social media if you didn't have the support of the Saudi government. If the Saudi government didn't say it is okay, it wouldn't happen. So we live in a reality where those who, even in dua, sympathize with Palestinians end up in jail. And those who sympathize publicly with Israel are praised as great intellectuals and given time on air to appear on Saudi TV and publish in Saudi newspapers and get appointed as special advisors to the Crown Prince. But note, that the subordination and ineffectiveness of Muslim countries is part and parcel of the creation of a world order that is thoroughly, not just unjust, but that thoroughly recreates and reperpetuates the legacy of settler colonialism and the powers and the paradigms of colonialism in every sense. So recently, not just the Muslim countries and Arab countries that were entirely ineffective when they got together and managed to condemn Israel, but do absolutely nothing. Not even stand up to Israel, defy Israel on the issue of humanitarian aid to Palestinians. Not even that. Not even terminate relations. Not even tell Kushner and his allies and his right-wing evangelical buddies, get lost. This genocide changes everything. Not even that. Leave alone hint that we will even decrease oil production or raise the price of oil until you put a stop to this, an end to this genocide. We are so far removed from that. Before I forget, this is why when we see Saudi preachers, very famous Madkhali, Madkhalis are basically a theology creed created by what was formerly known as the Wahhabis. And if you want to understand, in other words, funded and created by Saudi. If you want to understand the extent of this new Islam, there was a very famous video of recently this Madkhali Imam that stood up there condemning Abu Ubaidah, the spokesman of Hamas, and telling Abu Ubaidah, Ya Abu Ubaidah, jahid bis sunan. Do jihad, not with weapons, not with arms. Don't defend yourself using arms when Israel is slaughtering and exterminating your people. This spokesman, who again is completely 100% funded and supported by Saudi, said, Ya Abu Ubaidah, jahid bis sunan. What that means is, do jihad. Your response to Israeli domination and subordination should be to uphold the Prophet's Sunnah. So while the Israelis annex your lands, destroy your livelihood, steal your homes, what you should do, literally, he said that. I'm not even exaggerating. Is teach women to wear the hijab and teach men to follow the sunnah, meaning grow their beard and wear the jalabiyah. So he was condemning Abu Ubaidah for using arms, condemning the Palestinian people for defending themselves, and telling them, you are Islamically fi dalal. Literally, he said that basically you are completely lost Islamically. Why? Because what you should be doing for Palestinians is teaching women hijab and separating men from women and teaching men to do the miswak and wear the beard and wear their jalabiyas. But for a moment there, you are tempted to say, oh, this is absurd. This is an example of absurdity. Let's wave it away and marginalize it. Really? Think about it. Maybe this idiot actually articulated it in very explicit terms. But isn't this exactly the position of institutional and formal Islam everywhere you look? How many of the Muslims that speak and in an instant get 140,000 views, 150,000 views, who get up there and effectively tell you the solution before oppression is patience and endurance. Focus on your akhirah. Be a selfish individual. If you get together with others, get together to do dhikr. But emancipation, liberation, justice, transformation of society, so that there is no fitna and no fasad fil ard. Their response to this is, just worship Allah. Just focus on you individually worshiping Allah. And then Allah will take care of this fasad fil ard and fitna stuff. And it is impious to say, when will Allah take care of it? Because it's on Allah's time, not yours. Well, should I do anything to actually serve that cause? Yeah. Do ibadah. Worship. Take care of yourself and your family. Isn't this the equivalent of what that Madkhali idiot said of Jahid bis Sunan? It is exactly the same theology and the same message. Listen, there are no secrets. There are no surprises. The position, whether it's Sunni Islam or Shia Islam, the position in every Islamic school I am aware of is that there are two types of jihad. The first type we are not talking about, and we are not interested in, the imperial expansive jihad. And that type of jihad, sure, there are a lot of scholars who said pursuing knowledge, worshipping Allah, dhikr is better than that jihad. I believe that in their medieval style of narrative, medieval narrative style, they were saying, we don't believe in this aggressive type of jihad. We don't believe in this imperial type of Islam. But the second type is a different animal altogether. What is known as jihad daf' as-sa'il. Jihad daf' as-sa'il. Defensive jihad. The jihad when people come to colonize your land, take your homes, and that jihad, you don't need the permission of, a slave doesn't need the permission of his master. His child doesn't need, or his son doesn't need the permission of his parents. A citizen doesn't need the permission of the ruler. That jihad is fard ayn. Every individual Muslim has an obligation to defend Muslim lands and to repel aggression against Muslims. And it is kabira min al-kabair. It is considered a major sin if your Muslim brother whose home is being invaded, in istansaraka, if he calls upon you for assistance and you fail to assist, your status, and this is by ijma', because I don't know a dissenting opinion, your status, some jurists said, is you have committed a kabira min al-kaba'ir, equal to fornicating or committing adultery. Others said you are no longer Muslim at all. But the Muslim mind, Muslim consciousness is being uprooted from its very core. And there's no secret, as I said, colonialism came and found a Muslim theology, that theology of daf' as-sa'il, to be extremely inconvenient. And so it engaged in centuries-long project of reinventing and reconstructing Muslim theology. Here is the thing that really troubles me. Look at the protests in the streets. Look at the vast majority of people who are actively doing something about the genocide in Gaza. Is it led by Islamic movements? No. If we are going to be fair and honest, it's actually a secular opposition movement. Muslim organizations are largely absent. What a lot of people do not know is that the masters of these Muslim organizations sitting in Saudi and the Emirat and places like Egypt are issuing fatwa after fatwa after fatwa that going out in demonstrations is haram, that protesting is indulging in fitan, that a proper Muslim should not walk in a demonstration if next to them might be a woman. I am not kidding you. Don't go out demonstrating in France and Britain because you might be walking around and next to you is a woman and you might then experience fitna. Wal-'iyazu billah. And this constant drumbeat of meekness, of lack of backbone, of weakness, of servitude, of subordination, of the emptying of Islam of its soul is a constant narrative that is being spewed out there to poison and corrupt the Muslim consciousness. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم أسأل الله استجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. So the Arab and Muslim states met and amounted to nothing. But we got an opportunity to watch another spectacle in these recent days. The world in the General Assembly examined and voted on a number of resolutions related to Palestine. The most famous of these resolutions was a resolution that condemns illegal Israeli settlements in occupied Palestine and Syria. In other words, trying to say, yeah, we've given Israel a license to commit genocide, but we're still principled people because we don't want Israel. We're not saying that these illegal settlements are lawful. In other words, we've destroyed international law, but we're going to pretend we're upholding international law when it comes to the Geneva Convention prohibition against stealing and annexing the land of the colonized people. And in this General Assembly resolution, it's amazingly telling. 90% of the world voted against Israel. And again, it was Canada, the United States, who voted with Israel, refused to even condemn the stealing of Palestinian lands and the annexation of Palestinian lands, the most basic precept. I mean, how can you claim to be in favor of a two-state solution if you don't even condemn the stealing of Palestinian lands? But Canada and the United States voted against a resolution, joined by Hungary. Hungary has a right-wing, Islamophobic, fascist government in power that absolutely hates Muslims. There were a number of abstentions. So 7 voted against. Canada, the United States, Hungary, And then the four other countries are places like Micronesia, in other words, these small countries that are colonized by the US. They have nominal independence, but they use the US dollar as their currency, and they're effectively US territories. So they always vote whatever the US tells them, whatever way the US tells them to vote. The population of these four polities that voted with the US and Canada comes out to about 150,000 people. So it is the US, Canada, and Hungary against the rest of the world. And Israel, of course, joined by Israel. I forgot Israel. Interestingly, a sad commentary upon our modern world system. There were a number of countries that did not vote, not for or against or even abstain. Countries like Venezuela, like Afghanistan, like Somalia, like Madagascar. Why? Well, Venezuela has its assets frozen by the US, so the money it owes in American banks are frozen, and as a result, Venezuela can't pay its UN dues, and so it can't vote. Somalia and Afghanistan, which countries which have certainly voted against Israel, are often unable to afford the cost of having the representatives being present in the UN. So, in truth, Canada and the US, on even the most extreme issues, stand alone in their support of Israel. There were a number of other resolutions voted on that same day. Among the most shocking, UNRWA, as I've mentioned before, is the UN body created by the United Nations. And in fact, the US played a pioneering role. Well, I mean, it played the main role in creating UNRWA at the time, because the US was embarrassed by the scale of Palestinian refugees. And because Israel refused to allow these Palestinians the right to return, the solution that countries like the United States and France came up with is, let's create a sort of a form of apologetica, if you will. Let's create a UN body that is dedicated to taking care of the Palestinian refugees. This same body, UN officials, Israel killed about 100 of them in this recent genocide. And there was a resolution that same day. UNRWA has been complaining, saying, you, the United Nations, you've charged us to do a job. You didn't protect us. We've lost 100 of our employees. And Israel has destroyed our supplies and our equipment and our offices. And you didn't protect us from Israel. And we've run out of sources. So we cannot do the job that you, the United Nations, told us we have to do. So if you want, just shut us down, put us out of our misery. So there was a resolution that same day to provide funding for UNRWA. To provide funding for UNRWA to do what? To feed Palestinian refugees. That's it. The United States and Canada, again, voted against that resolution. So when we talk about US complicity in genocide, it is complete and total from every angle. I'm going to close with this. You know, if you're Muslim, you've heard from Muslim circles and Muslim voices a lot of ignorant, thoroughly ignorant nonsense about critical race studies. But among the critical race studies theorists that I like and that has enormously useful insights for those who have a brain and have a conscience is a man called Derek Bell. And Derek Bell was a law professor at Harvard for many years until he resigned in protest over Harvard's racial policies and hiring practices. Anyway, Derek Bell, looking at US history, and in fact, looking at human history, points out to how endemic and ingrained racism is. Even the people who do not think they're racist will discover that indeed they are. And that so much of human history has been premised on the logic that the fairer skinned people have a right to further their interests at the expense of darker skinned people. And if you knew anything about what Europe and the United States, even today, are doing in Africa, or what the US is doing in South America, you would see the verification of that truth. Those who are fairer skinned always seem to have the attitude that darker skinned people should pay the price for our well-being and the furtherance of our interests. We see this again thoroughly at display in the genocide against the Palestinian people. Israel treats Palestinians like every racist state treats its darker-skinned minority, as a subservient class, as a class that should exist in silence, helping us, fairer-skinned people, build our society when we want them to help us. But after helping us, they should accept their subservient position and shut up and stay silent and not create any problems or trouble. And if they do, time and again, throughout human history, we have the right to exterminate them, because we in reality do not recognize darker skinned people as equal human beings. I submit to you that what Derek Bell said about race is very true about Europe's, the West's relationship to Islam. The way that Europe and the United States, and this could be a subject of another khutbah on another day, have looked at Islam first as a threat with a certain degree of reverence, fear, and anxiety. But as Europe and the West ascended and Muslims deteriorated, that turned into a thoroughly racialized perspective, where Muslims are looked at as they have the right to exist to further our well-being. That oil in their lands is to further our well-being. When there was Egyptian cotton, well, it's there to further our well-being. If there is a canal that we can pass through, like the Suez Canal, it's there to further our well-being. Other than that, they should shut up and not create trouble. And if they create trouble, then we will teach them a lesson that we are more than willing to exterminate them. Now, many of you might listen to all of this and say, so what is the solution? Well, the solution begins exactly the way Surah Al-Anfal talked to Muslims. The solution begins with you. Decolonize your consciousness. Understand your religion as a message of liberation, as resistance against subordination. And then look around, make connections to fellow Muslims who also understand Islam as a message of liberation and anti-subordination. Understand that we dream of a different world, a world of greater justice and greater equity, a world that doesn't respect oppressive hierarchies, and that we resist. If we live, we resist. And that is what our existence on this earth, until Allah wills, if Allah wills, a change in our condition. But as long as we live, we must resist. Our resistance is our testament. Our resistance is our life and the life of our faith. Most importantly, make it your personal business to be aware of the forces that serve colonialism by murdering the soul of your faith, and refuse to submit to these voices. Refuse to recognize their Islamicity. Refuse to recognize their legitimacy. Refuse to recognize their right to represent your faith. Say, no, you are not a valid alternative. You are an aberration. You are a treason to the message of Islam. You are a betrayal. We don't recognize you. We don't validate you. We insist with a clear view on what Tawheed within Islam means, should mean, and will always mean until Allah inherits this earth. Allahumma afu anna. Allahumma aghfir lana. Allahumma arhamna ya Rahman ya Rahim. واهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا. اللهم انصر أهلنا في غزة. اللهم شد من عضدهم وأيدهم. اللهم قوهم وصبرهم. اللهم يا علي يا عظيم لا تخذلهم. اللهم كن معهم. اللهم كن معهم يا رب العالمين. Allah, forgive our sins and aid us and help us to be true Muslims, standing for the message of liberation and emancipation that Islam is. And help, Ya Allah, emancipate our brothers and sisters in Gaza. Help, Ya Allah, liberate our brothers and sisters in Gaza. Don't fail them. Ya Allah, Ya Ali, Ya Azim. Wa salli wa sallim wa barik ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa aqim as-salah.